In this video, we'll be discussing a concept called the delayed c-bet or delayed continuation bet. If you watched our last couple videos on the more standard c-bet, you should remember that these three bullets describe the move. It's a bet on the flop by the pre-flop raiser or PFR, and the size of it is 50% to 100% of the pot. What's a delayed c-bet then? Well, it's all these three things. The only difference is instead of a bet on the flop, it's a bet made on the turn. It sounds simple enough, but it can actually be a little more complicated than a traditional c-bet. So let's work through a hand example to show you how the mechanics are different. Let's say the blinds are 10 and 20. We're facing one opponent in late middle position and we're seated on the button. He raises 3 times the big blind and we 3-bet to 150. We think he's a pretty loose, aggressive opponent. He's raised from this position a lot, so the 3-bet is reasonable. If you don't know what a 3-bet is, watch our separate video on the topic. He calls our 3-bet though. So the pot's now 330, and we'll both see a flop. Our hand, by the way, is King Queen suited. The flop comes out Ace King 9 rainbow. No flush draws, perhaps a straight draw, but our opponent checks to us. We have middle pair with a decent kicker. We might bet here, and this would be our window to make a traditional c-bet, but instead we just check back, and we see the turn a 2, offsuit. Our opponent actually checks to us again, and this is our window for a delayed c-bet. We fire 200 into a pot of 330, and our opponent folds, and the delay c-bet works. But you might be asking yourself, why did we let our opponent see a free turn? If we thought we were better on the flop, and we were only going to win 330 chips anyways, why not just take care of it on the flop with a traditional c-bet? Well, it turns out there's a few reasons why the delayed c-bet needs to be a part of your poker arsenal. The first, and probably most important, is something called balance. This means you need to vary your play. If you find yourself in the same situation with the same opportunity in poker, you can't always take the same action. In the case of the c-bet, your opponent, if he's a thinking player, will start to notice your c-bet frequency, and he'll start to defend against it, either by check raising when he's out of position, or by floating you, which means he'll call your c-bet with the intention of bluffing you on the turn or the river, and these are costly issues to get involved with. We don't want to be vulnerable to a check raise or a float, so we don't want to c-bet too often and let our opponents know that this is a favorite move of ours. So occasionally we need to be delaying our c-bet till the turn. Another reason why delayed c-betting is an important and positive move to have in your poker toolkit is because it induces bluffs from your opponents. In our example, let's say our opponent, before he folded, he had 10-10. If we bet on the flop, he's going to fold. But if we check back to him, delaying our c-bet, he might actually bet into us on the turn, thinking that he'll represent the ace, and we'll have to fold a king, any king. Thus he bluffs with his pocket tens. Another way to look at this is by checking back on the flop, we're widening our opponent's betting range. We're making him more comfortable with betting the turn and or the river with a wider range of hands, including weaker hands that we beat. The final thing you should consider when deciding whether to make a normal c-bet or waiting till the turn is what the normal c-bet will accomplish. Sometimes you'll find yourself in a case where a normal c-bet folds worse hands. We'll use the negative sign to mean your opponent's hand's worse than yours, or better hands than yours call. And if this is the case, a c-bet's a bad idea. Let's take a look in our hand example again. Let's say instead of 10-10, our opponent might have Ace King suited, or just Ace X suited. That's a reasonable hand for him to have re-raised and then called pre-flop. If we bet into him on the flop when he checks, he's going to call us with a pair of aces. So he'll call with better. If we c-bet into him when he has 10-10, he's going to fold, so he'll fold a worse hand. And if that's the case, consider delaying your c-bet until the turn.